the inaugural episode of Behind the Tenant. My name is Richard Harbridge, and with me is
Diego Silva. Hello. All right.
So I have a joke for you, Diego. It's terrible, like all my jokes are. So, what computer sings the best?
I
Adele.
wonder.
Yeah. Hello. All right. So today's
What
episode.
a great start.
Today's episode's dangerous defaults. Defaults of dad jokes aside, it's a good topic. I think there's so many things in Microsoft 365 and the work that we do where, the default is not always the best option. But before that, we always like to highlight at least like one thing, news or something that's changing. So yeah, I'll go first. Some time ago, there was an announcement where Microsoft was going to have the Microsoft 365 Copilot app. That's the app. If you were to hit the Windows key and you type in Copilot on your desktop, you'll see that there's a Microsoft 365 Copilot app. It has this wonderful experience and allows you to use all the Copilot capabilities, whether you're the paid $30 user a month or the other users. And it's available to all users, whether they want it or not, on their desktops, because they have Microsoft 365. They have it, except the European Economic Area. So that was the update, C115233. And everyone hopefully was already ready. But I find there's a lot of people I'm talking to who are like, what? We didn't know, because not everyone pays attention to the message center, that this was happening. And now customers are asking them about Copilot because now they're seeing it light up on their desktops. So that's my one for today.
One thing to also highlight, and that is that the M365 Copilot app is not to be confused with the Copilot app that most people already have on their computers. That one is designed for your personal accounts. It doesn't have the same information protection that M365 Copilot app does. So you're going to end up seeing two of them. And the only way to separate between one and the other is that one has the Copilot logo with the M365 icon at the bottom, or the M365 letters at the bottom.
No one was confused by the fact that they had a personal and a professional version of Teams. I'm sure there'll be no consequences for user confusion here.
At least they're not calling Copilot Classic, so.
That's true. What do you got to share with us today?
Okay, so for me, the one thing that I just learned, which was through our message center update that was announced in July, I believe, is about the sending feedback to Microsoft. So recently I had been doing a number of sessions on SharePoint Brand Center, which involved image auto tag. And with the image auto tags, sometimes they don't come as you would desire them to. So in the image tag field in SharePoint, I saw that there was a link to sending feedback to Microsoft. Through that link, I realized that, hey, that functionality is not enabled yet.
I wanted to see what you're saying. So I'm just going to go to a random SharePoint site. And because you said it was in SharePoint, right? If I load up a SharePoint site, I think I know what you're talking about. There's this feedback button up here, right? This is in all the apps, right? So I had Copilot open. It's down in the bottom left. And you have this feedback button. Give a compliment, report a problem, make a suggestion. So if I'm like, I love Copilot, what's kind of neat is you can include a screenshot, say, this is great, I'll allow, and then I can send that to Microsoft. And then you're saying we get something here? Is like, there's something else happening there?
But see, there's the other side of that, because throughout my entire life, every time I saw this send feedback button, my first question is, who's really reading this, right? Who's really looking at this stuff? Who's getting this information? Well, now I found it out. So one, the project teams at Microsoft are getting these feedback directly from users. So that is great, because now you have a direct way whenever you see a problem to send that to those teams. But as admins, that is also very valuable information, because if you go to your admin center and if you look under health, what is it? Product feedback.
Okay.
Will list all the feedback that your users are submitting. So that way you can basically look at everything that people are having issues with and submitting feedback to Microsoft, and maybe it's time for you to look into giving those people some training or creating some additional content, because right there, everything will be listed. But
it even has the attachment, which is pretty cool.
Yes, but there is one small catch though, because in order for this to be fully functional, you actually have to configure this in Microsoft Admin Center. But it's through a website that you don't typically go to, which is config.office.com.
Yeah.
And I believe you have already configured that.
Boom.
There you go.
Policies
You
down
can
here.
configure several of them for feedback. And
Sure.
now here's where it's going to get confusing, right? Okay, so first you're going to select if it applies to a single user, specified groups, or to anonymous access. So
Awesome.
with that one that is configured to all users, you're now going to look at that list and you're going to see 2,327 items in there. And you're like, holy shoot, what is that? But you're going to search, correct, you're going to search for feedback. And the ones you want to look into are allow users to submit feedback to Microsoft and allow users to include log files and relevant content samples, and as well as screenshots and attachments.
Love it.
So with those, you can actually allow people to just submit the particular screenshot of what they found issues with. And those same policies will work inside of SharePoint. They work inside Microsoft Office apps, so Word, Excel, for your desktop, as well as all the websites. So you have a one-stop shop basically for configuring the policies. Admins will also have a way of viewing everything that the user submitted, and Microsoft will also get this stuff. So everyone is happy and everyone gets their feedback.
Yeah. So, today's topic discussion is dangerous defaults. And one of the things that happens a lot is a lot of customers have Microsoft 365 environments. A lot of people are very busy and they're not Microsoft 365 experts. And so what naturally happens is a lot of the default values don't get changed. And so people work within the constraints of the system. And then later, a consultant like yourself or myself or somebody else comes in and they say like, hey, there's a bunch of concerns here. Like these things need to be switched, or maybe an emergency happens, like something leaks or there's an issue because you didn't realize that you were exposing yourself in a certain way. So those defaults can be quite impactful. And so when it comes to defaults, there's all sorts of different categories of them. I thought this would be a great opportunity for us to kind of dig into some of those. Like, look, here's a tip. If you're, starting out or you're in Microsoft 365 and you've never checked it, you should check these default settings because these are the ones that are the most risky or the ones that cause the most disruption. What are some ones that are really top of mind for you there? And then I'll share a couple and we'll just keep going back and forth.
Well, for me, of course, being the SharePoint person, right? Obviously, external sharing. Because whenever you get a brand new tenant, everything is enabled. Anyone in your tenant can share content via anonymous links. So it's all out in the open. That's one of the things that you're first going to have to look into. Locking down or reducing access. Do you want to allow external users to access your content? So that's all the stuff that you have to do on SharePoint. Again, all in M365 Admin Center. But that is some things that you have to do. What is yours?
Yeah, I think that's a really good one. And in the sharing, you've got like guest access, right? Which is different. I wonder if maybe it's good to like talk about the policies. So let's do a little screen sharing for a second. For those who are watching online, for those who are listening, we'll just describe it. So changing like those settings, I 100% agree. External sharing is the big one. So you can do that at the tenant level. So you can do that for like SharePoint and OneDrive separately, most permissive to least permissive. And then you can even do it at the site level, right? So a lot of times what people will do is they'll have it most permissive, but they'll have a very specific policy where as they provision sites, they make sure that they're not, sharing by default. And so you have to go through a process of like, I want it to share to kind of open it up, or based on the provisioning classification strategy or something. So those make a big difference. But on the same vein, if you kind of look down below here, there are a few other settings. So one of the ones that's I really like is this idea of actually being able to have things expire. So let's say people are using OneDrive, which most people do for external sharing. That's a safe space that you want to give people the ability to do it. Then we can at least have overriding policies where whatever you do for your sharing, we can expire it more aggressively. Another big one that I see a lot in real world is a lot of orgs use this limit sharing by domain. So you can whitelist specific partners' domains, and then those people it can be shared with. Let's say you have a lot of sensitivity and you're really concerned about it. So you don't want to lock everything down, but you also want to make sure that when you do allow sharing, it's only with specific tenants. So there's a way to do it there. And then another one that's really great is these users could share. So even if you do allow it for everyone at the tenant level, at the service level, you can still actually tweak some of these other settings at the site level. Who am I allowing it for? And then, of course, this also works with links because links have a whole lot of these settings as well. So that's a great example.
So while you're there, one thing that I wanted to highlight, because you are on a brand new tenant, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so I was just looking as you were speaking on my tenant as well, and the one that says allow guests to share items that they don't own.
Yeah.
I never have that turned on myself because
Ah,
if you're dealing with sensitive information, do you really want someone that you send a document to share that to someone else? You probably don't, right? So that's one that I don't ever like having turned on. Again, each organization will have their own needs, but that is one that I never turn on.
yeah. And what we're seeing here is I specifically have this tenant, so it is all the default settings. So what we're saying is like, what would you change? So I think most of the time, I'm not the biggest fan of changing these like right from the get
Right.
go. I definitely think when you're starting out, like you have no idea what you're doing, like absolutely, right? If you want to like put something as a placeholder and then work towards a strategy. But I do think the ones that I do love is I like this. I'm a huge fan of being able to choose who can share
Mm,
and picking the subset of people who can share. And then the other one that I find that I like a lot is because I do find a lot of organizations are comfortable making OneDrive the sharing space, right? So many SharePoint
right.
sites will just be disabled by default. And so, it's a natural way for people to do that. And what's nice about OneDrive is we can policy OneDrive in a few other ways. Like we can be more aggressive with the LP, we can do things like that. And so I think that's an interesting one that I've seen done a lot. And then the other one that I see is at the site level. So let's go look at the sites. I see a lot of people take like a site, let's take this super important team of important people site. And what you can do at the site level is you can also change some of these settings. So, external sharing is potentially very helpful here where you can say things like, hey, for my default links, let's not use the anyone with a link as the default. Let's make
Right.
sure it's only specific people. In fact, I think most people accidentally share stuff because they just choose only people in your org as a link for pretty much
Yes.
everything. And the risk isn't, I want to be clear, like what happens is if you do this, someone needs the link still. They have to click on the link, right, in order to trigger it. But there's so many experiences now that light up what's shared with you that I think that this is one of those dangerous ones. So I really think like this
Hmm.
should be the default pretty much for every SharePoint site.
Right.
It's really rare that I recommend anything else. So that's
And
another great example.
And honestly, you can, if you really want to do this correctly as an admin, you can probably spend a whole day just reviewing these settings and going over with your organization because it's not just an admin choice. You might have to involve legal, you might have to involve other departments. That is definitely an area that they should be looking into when you're configuring your tenant to ensure that you're not giving more access than needed to. And again, we're always talking governance, we're talking Copilot readiness, right? That is the thing to talk about now. Keep that in mind because the way the documents are shared through all the organizations will have direct impact on the results that Copilot are providing to your users.
Yeah, the other one that I know comes up a lot is like the access settings in Teams. So like external access in Teams, which is different than like we were just talking about SharePoint and OneDrive there. But actually, there's a bunch of places actually in Teams where you have external access and settings. So I think that's probably a natural segue for another area. So here I've got, you can see it's a brand new tenant. I have this allow external domains. So that's like your federation. So like if I want to look up you and message you, right, with
Right.
your unsuck Microsoft 365, et cetera, I can. And then similarly, you can kind of see there's a number of other settings within these spaces. So there's guest access to Teams. I won't walk through them all. There's anonymous meeting join. That's a big one. So a lot of people do like Zoom bombing, right? Is what was
Mm-hmm.
kind of coined. And so Teams bombing is a thing. And so what happens is they figure out the link. There's lots of ways to do it. And then they kind of just join a meeting. And so, if people don't know, a lot of people just admit everyone, right, who comes to the meeting. And so you get a lot of these anonymous people joining meetings. Third party team apps is another huge one. So a lot of times there's a whole app ecosystem. And of course, one of the defaults that you want to make it permissible is that you want to make it easy for people to use all these wonderful apps to integrate and work with Microsoft 365 and Teams. But Teams apps often over ask. So they ask for all these extra permissions, and people, it's narrowed like it's your mail, it's your, profile information, but that's a pretty permissive thing because now all of a
Yes.
sudden they can see any email that you're attached to, et cetera. So while it's nice that apps are approved on the App Store and there's other risks that are mitigated, I do think that's a category that I see a lot of people saying, you know what, we're not going to allow all third-party apps. We're going to have admins approve, third-party apps, and users can submit the request. There's a whole engine built into the system.
Right.
So I think that kind of covers the main ones in Teams, but like there's quite a bit there that we just said: chat federation, guest access, anonymous meeting join, and third-party team
Yep.
apps. It's all those defaults probably should be
And
changed.
and just a quick bonus one on the apps, which is users, even if an app is blocked or disabled in Teams, you have the option to allow end users to request those apps. One thing that I like turning on, if you already have your help desk ticketing system, is you can actually indicate the URL for your app intake request within Teams Admin Center. So if a user requests an app, it doesn't go to a queue that is sitting on the back end of Microsoft 365 Admin Center that no one might be looking at. Right. It goes directly into your ticketing system and it produces a record. So there's a lot that you can do on that end as well. Again, we're not touching it. This is like a little bonus one, but that's always a useful one to know.
No, it's like turning off site creation. Similar idea, right? I think most organizations, you want people to proliferate sites, but you want them to do it responsibly. And so with great power comes great responsibility. So making it so that you have a site request system is a natural kind of governance maturity thing that happens. The benefit is we'll template it for you. We'll give you these benefits. Right. But in the meantime, maybe just make it so only some people can create sites. So at least have to go through training, or we trust you to create a site. That's a good baseline, I'd say, that everyone should do. And then, the next level is to have provisioning. Same idea. Like, so you can redirect, when you go to create a new site, like where does that go? So yeah, there's so many ways to enhance this once you do change a default. Like what are we replacing it with? And sometimes it doesn't take any new effort. I think the example of I would just want to trust these users, so I'm going to give them rights, but not everyone is a safer, starting point than giving everyone the rights and then having sprawl and, cleanup work that you need to do later.
But that's always how it is in all of M365, right? If you want the basics, you got them covered one way or another. A little bit by training, a little bit by policy, and then you have a beautiful array of third-party apps that can do this like, times 100, but the basics, you can get all of that through M365 Admin Center too. So
true. So what are some other ones? So MFA, right? Not turned on by default for all users. We're at that stage where MFA just needs to be an auto on for everyone. And then if you have that MFA, a lot of times people don't realize if legacy authentication protocols are on, you don't need that on anymore unless you have a very specific legacy app requirement. So like closing that loop is another big one. What's do you see too many global admins? What's another default you see, overused?
Too many global admins. I think using privileged, I forgot the name now, PIM in Azure, at least locks it down a little bit because you see then each time that privileged row is enabled. But yes, I feel like the tendency is to always, you're a new admin, here it is, global admin. And next thing you know, you have 20 of them in the organization, right? And then something gets changed, and who did that? So I'm a big fan of having like your user account to just be a regular user. You need privileged access to do something. You enable that row, but then you get out of it. Does everyone in your organization need to be a global, or do all admins in your organization need to be a global admin? Probably not. Just give them what they need.
Yeah.
This is not a matter of saying no to people or locking down anything, but chances are not everyone needs to manage every single aspect of M365 because chances are that they're not going to know everything like I don't.
And, it's interesting because like what you were describing to me made me remember that like a lot of these defaults change. So like if you created your tenant a few years ago, you might have a bunch of defaults that aren't, if I create a new tenant, they're not defaulted anymore because we kind of know better. And it's a secure by design principles and things like that now. I think one of the ones that always surprised me is most organizations that have Microsoft 365, they have safe attachments, they have safe links, right? They have those license capabilities, but they're not on, So like even something as simple as that, like the number one thing that happens all the time, right? You get like an email because everyone gets phishing no matter what you do. And so when you get that phishing email, like making sure that if they do click that link, at least it's a safe link and it explodes like in that experience, that makes a big difference. SPF, DKIM, DMARC, right, for your email domain. So people can't like hack it or co-opt it and use it, for malicious intent. Auto forwarding, disabling that. So you can still forward, but not doing it holistically. So yeah, there's so many things. What I love to do now is maybe do a little bit of storytelling, a little sharing. One of the big ones that we always talk about is it's hard to find all the information we're looking for. And it's almost like as an admin or someone in behind the tenant, it's like, well, that escalated quickly. Right. So do you have any stories, war stories, or things that maybe someone you saw in the community who had this really amazing story that you want to share? Just anything that kind of comes to mind there.
I have one a while ago, a developer dealing with Power Automate flows for the first time created a flow that was sending emails for the entire organization, an infinite loop. And it was like times 1,000, times 1,000, times 1,000. And this person's account was locked for a good week. And basically the answer from technical support was, yeah, you're just going to have to wait for this to stop sending these messages. So that was definitely a situation. There are more measures in place now within Power Platform. Things don't happen as quickly as they did anymore. But at that time, this was right when we had moved from SharePoint Designer workflows to Power Automate. So people were still kind of poking around and trying to probe, see, what did what. And that was one that, locked down this developer's account for a good 2 weeks that I remember at the time. That was pretty hurtful.
Power Platform is such a good one because, default environments are always, and everyone, denies, like, oh, we don't have a lot of people using Power Platform or whatever. And then they look at the reports and they're like, what are all these? And there's, people, whether they're experimenting or doing something, it's all in that one, default environment. I can imagine scenarios where, someone's like, let me see if I can sync this data to Slack, or even worse, like Google Drive, but it's a personal drive and things like that. So I think it's a good call it.
Yeah, and you're making a very good point, because when you're using Power Platform for the first time, so you're implementing Power Apps, Power Automate in your organization, you're just going to have a default environment. So first thing you do, make sure that you have your data loss prevention policy, so DLP, implemented correctly. Because if you don't, you easily can allow a user to upload all their SharePoint files into like Facebook. So what a DLP policy will do is will separate what is business from what is non-business. So if you have a connector that is reading files from SharePoint in a flow, and you classify the SharePoint connector as business, then let's say you have a connector for Facebook and you're going to classify Facebook as non-business, right? So that way, if you do it, that if you implement your DLP policy that way, you will never be able to connect your SharePoint connector with Facebook. They won't be able to talk to each other, basically, and you're going to avoid someone having a flow that has that connection. You can still have one flow that deals with Facebook. You can have one that deals with SharePoint, but they won't talk to each other. This is like in a very simplistic and general way. We can go down into the weeds of blocking particular actions. So let's say you are part of an organization that needs to read social media posts, but you don't want to be able to post anything on social media. So you enable gathering messages from whatever service you want, and you enable your developers to create flows that read those messages, but you may not want to enable them to send stuff out. And you also can create different policies for different groups of people. So end users, for instance, will have a much more limited set of actions and flows that they can access versus a developer or someone in a developer tenant. So definitely look into DLP for Power Platform. That would be my first advice. And of course, if you can, get out of the default environment.
And I like that the echoing of, hey, at least who can create these is a subset of users, or DLP applies to everyone except if they get approval, and then they get added to a group, and then they can, so you're still not really blocking it, but you're putting a step in for monitoring for some auditability. It reminds me, auditing for many customers is not on by default. In Microsoft 365, you go to the Compliance Center, it's not on. In fact, there's mailbox auditing, which is different than the unified audit log. So you want to turn on both. And it's surprising how many organizations, they're like, hey, this thing happened. And so we're trying to understand it. So we're like, whoa, let's go check the audit log, and then we'll unpack it from there. And we load up the Compliance Center and the audit log's not on. And, oh, well, there's very limited things we can do. At least turn on auditing, I think, is an easy one that everyone agrees should be done.
And along with everything that we've been discussing here today, I think one important thing to always be mindful of is we come from a world that we were doing this on a server, we had patches and we had updates, and we could be prepared for these things coming up and we had the chance to review them. Now these changes are being rolled out each day almost, right? Pretty much every day. And so it's very important to keep in mind that everything that we're discussing now, or everything that you're looking into every day, make sure that you're revisiting them every couple of weeks, every couple of months, because new settings may come out and you're going to be asking yourself, where did this come from? When was this announced? Sometimes things are turned on by default, sometimes they're turned off, but make sure that you're always revisiting your strategy. If there's documentation to be written, make sure that is written as well, because you can easily, 1 week that you're on vacation or something, you miss out on an update, the next thing you know, it's turned on for the entire tenant.
I love you brought it full circle. We started with, Copilot, Microsoft 365 Copilot app is deployed on desktops. And now we're saying like, hey, it's a default. And one of the things you could look at is Message Center, that thing that's affecting everyone. It's rolling out right now. By the end of November, everyone will have this app deployed, again, unless you're in the European zone. So like, that's a big deal and something you could have opted out so you could roll it out at your own pace, at your own timing. So I think very good. I love all of the things we were sharing.
Right.
I know we were both like jonesing to share screen and walk through and how-tos. But yeah, hopefully those who are listening find some nuggets there, some things you haven't explored yourself. Looking forward to the next time we have a Behind the Tenant discussion,
Absolutely.
maybe some guests and more. So yeah, thanks so much.
And have some questions, reach out to us.
All right. So like, subscribe, ding the notification
Yes,
bell.
click here.
Yeah.
Whatever.
Consider it like just being like, well, you're friendly enough to be like, you guys should just keep trying. You'll get there. Thanks so much.
Nice. Thank you, Richard.